All right, now I got my microphone working. I'm going to start this presentation with Mike's on. Check it out. I'm going to start this with the start of creation and the first sound from God being let there be light. And when we see in let there, how we can see letter, and we also can see let here. Now, this is the starting point, so we can also see the two L's as an 11. And when we look at light, it's also spelled with a GH, kind of like the ghost. But when we look at right, right is also has that GH in it. So this is also going to get into letters because the first words were let there be light. And when we look at Adam and Eve, this is getting into creation. We're also dealing with American English because the story of Adam and Eve came through American English. And when we look at B, the letter B is also 2. And we know that 1 and 1 equals 2. But when we look at 11 and letter, we're getting into the letter K. So we know that K sideways is also the pause symbol, which is also an 11. But when we do or play cards, the high card is the ace, which is the high card and the low card. So we're also getting into singular and plural because we get into K's. So when we get into K's, we're also getting into not only they say K as ace when we're dealing like with magic, with the sounds and symbols, but we also deal with case, just like letters are encasing frequencies. Okay, I'm about to rip this up just so you know. So when we get into the Sumerian god of creation, that is taken from Wikipedia, Enki, which we can also see Nike in there. That symbol right there. See if I make this bigger here. So now we see this symbol. I'm going to get into this. We're dealing with light and shadow. We're also dealing with a star. And we see this on caves, which just same thing, just dealing with that kind of going left and right. So I'm getting this is from cuneiform, and cuneiform we also see only we see uniform, like casing frequencies. We also see unicorn. Horses obviously dealing with energy. So when we look at that, we see also the opposing Ks with the light and shadow. So Enki was also the god of creation, or an Akkadian, and Ki was also the god AE or EA, like we know EA Sports, also known as AE, which also has the same sound as A. But we also see Adam and Eve. We're dealing with the god of creation, and is identified by some scholars as LA and Canaanite religion. The name was rendered Eos in Greek sources. So we're going to get into this. Greek equivalent Poseidon or Prometheus. Also, we know we're dealing with water. And we also see dealing with the M and the N. Parents are An and Namu, AN and Namu. So also dealing with the center of the alphabet with the water. When we connect the M and the N, we see the waves. We also see this as the poles, with the push and the poles. We also see the number 7 commonly associated with Jesus. P is the 16th letter, which is also 7. And we see that positioned in this symbol as well. And also getting into Jesus between the two crosses. Jesus carries his cross sideways, which is also, when we look at certain symbols like Pac-Man, we could see that like the 7 colors of the rainbow encircling the 7 as a mouth. And then we could also see the 7 as a separation to splitting the cross. So we're getting into dimension shifts here and frequencies and colors. But when we look at P, not only do we see omnipresence, and then we also have resense, which we can also have resents, also dealing with emotions, attraction. Then we also see the symbol for phosphorus is also like a tree above a downward triangle. So phosphorus, also getting into minerals, has to do with light, versus those as in a rock, which are oxides. And then when we flip the P upside down, we also get the D like dark. And we know the first letter in Hebrew is a B. And we know the first sound would be like a bark. The first mark, like on a tree. But we also see the musical note in this symbol. And when we get into symbol, we can move that around and see smile. Bow. So in that bow, there's a lot going on. We could see the one spectacle, like the one eyeglass, like the Monopoly man, how they used to wear like one eyeglass. So Jesus is also referred to as light, and we scram that around. We could also see tile. And so just like a game board, we know that tiles, like the 4 square, is also a number, which is also like a hash, which is that H in that ash, ash to ash, dust to dust. Which we can also see has. Okay, what I'm showing here is a relationship. We look at AE, We could look at this as 1, 5, or we could look at the Roman numeral 5, which looks like an upside down A. Now, because we're talking about creation, 1, 5 is also the letter O, which is also 0. We even say 0 as zero. Just doing that resurrecting. Because when we do the same thing, crunching numbers, 26, 5, and 18, when we reduce them, the 18 to 9, 26 to 8, so 13 and 9. Oh, I'm leaving out the O. Good thing this is pause and go. 0 equals 64, which that equals 10. Which also gets into the rising, how 1 rose from 0 and rose is 0. But it relate this to Jesus Christ and how every rose has a thorn, into these meanings that we see. And we're also getting into energy, how energy emanates. And the omnipresent, how we're dealing with descriptions. It's kind of like ripples in a pond because we're catching up to something with meaning. So we're dealing with perception and intention. Back to Poseidon, we also see positive and negative. And phosphorus in the pos. We see Poseidon, phosphorus. So just like the split crosses, when we look the split number, the two H's or the two ladders, the two letters, H is 8. We can also see like the heart shape. If we flip this triangle down, we got the heart. So I'm going to get into that too. So when they say breaking a heart breaks, and it showed like lightning in between the heart, which is also kind of like the letter N. Lightning. Actually, it's two letter N's if you do it like that. Um, so Moses got the 10 Commandments from lightning on the two slabs. And then when we look, Moses was the first preacher, also dealing with pressure. And also we see like Mount Meru. We also see room. Just like Rome is also casing. And we're also dealing with heartache, but we're also dealing with the attaching, and whole lot going on there. But when we see this letter O as a seed, we could see this underground, as in like O-N, ground. See what I'm interchanging symbols and sounds here. But then we could see the N going up above the 0, where here we see the M. We see the light like as above ground. So we could also see this like light and this is seed, underground. We also see the vibration happening in the knee. Just like they say, one knee, there's one knee up, one knee down. One eye is open, one eye is closed. And then when we deal with the Adam, we're dealing with that spoke in the wheel. Spoke in. All right, here we go. Not only that, too, we can also see the symbol for C and D, because if we're dealing with that split in the middle, we do the add, the ADD. Then we look at subtract. And add and subtract, we have as, just like as above, as below. We also have add, subtract. So, keep going. I see a lot going on there, but dealing with seen and seers, we take away that the T in the middle is kind of like that balancer, like that the puppet strings. We also see the letter A like that too, because the T is kind of like the top of a pyramid. Like if we would see that halo, then like a clock. So we could also see like sincere, but we also see center. We see recent, but we also see sinners. When we take away that T, we see sinners. And just like EA was also AE, would deal with A is open the mouth, first word, first letter. The I is also the L, same symbol. I'm gonna get into that. Also dealing with signal. That halo, just like that high and the low, also dealing with that open and the close. Because the A and the O is symbiotic, because the A is one and the O is O and E is one. So we look at like the LA angels and symbol, signal. So look at alchemy dealing with the square and the circle and the triangle. We see in the alphabet, it's also dealing with alchemy with the ABCs. The A with the awake, just one is rose from zero, one rose from zero. Arms stretch up when we wake. This could be like grounding too, because M is also like a mountain. So when we look at things like Lucifer, Cipher, Cipher, we could also see that the U is also half. If you were to fold it or look at it as light and dark, it's also half. Or if you look at the letters as shadows, or vice versa, of a zero, and the L would be half of a square. Eve ate the apple. There were two trees, the tree of good and evil, knowledge of, and the tree of life. Tree of life, TOL. We could also see tool. So when we look at the English language, don't deal with A and E was a history channel, but language is, we can also look at angle wedge. The UAGE is wedge, just like we see the A, first letter. Just like the ace is the high card, we see the wedge facing up. And it's interesting, down doesn't have an M, but we do have that W and that N, and down. And then the OP going in the other direction. Dealing with kind of like twisting. So I also look at words like tie and untie, because when we deal with time, we also see tie and then the letter M. We deal with dimensions and paradigms and pairing dimes. We know that the dime is the 10, which is the X. We look at like electricity, etc. A lot of things we could see in the abracadabra symbols, which are riddles or ripples, and we're decoding. And that D is like the devil, and like the loose cipher is like loose is like tying, untying knots, and seeing what fits together, almost like puzzle pieces. And if we look at these different directions of the 13s, so I see this a lot of ways. I also see Samson and Delilah. There's a lot of stuff coming up here, but 13, reduces the force. So they say the force be with you. Now keep in mind, we're looking at different angles. The angle wedge, English language is the angel language. We look in this way, we see omni. So we're dealing with the force of now, just like Yoda is today with that T. So we're dealing with that force, and we're dealing with that light and darkness. So we know we're arc and dark, and we're also dealing with that Noah's Ark. And just like Oannes is Noah's, came out the water. Just like there's always a rainbow. So this gets deep, but staying on track here, when we look at 13, there's no 13th floor. So I'm going to get also into stairs, dealing with casing, because casing is going back and forth because we're dealing with that movement. And just like a mirror, when you put 13 in the mirror, so this just makes me think about that Adam and Eve too, with the M and the V, and different ways we could look at that. But we see level. It was like we look at the letter A, it's similar to a level. But when we look at where did it come from, it came from, one was Elif, where we see life with a PH, which I'm also going to get into hocus pocus. and how things balance out, just like pride and humility, how I see it. And when we deal with scales, how that also comes from like a fish. And we also see lakes and scales. How we decode this with the letters, we're just untying the things that don't match and just seeing what connects. So not only do we see life, like breath of life, and EA is also in breath, also in beat, which also starts with B because 2 is watt. So when we get into this, this is also Aleph, ALIF. We're getting into different translations here. But the symbols for A also began as the letter N. Um, like this. And then there was another one that was like this, like a sideways A. But either way, we're doing with the 3, 1, 2, 3, right? Because this also gets into the 369, how the card in all is 3. The start 369, it's a card in AL. We get into that. But cardine is hinge in Latin. I heard that in Santos Bonacci talk, and I just want to add things that I thought of to, like ham also means to bend that knee. So we look at Abraham, and other words that begin with Abra, like shun, abrasion, which is to thrash at, and shun is also noise backwards. We see a lot, but we also see cards when we're dealing with cards. Rack the cards, or we're also getting into the balls, but when we shuffle the deck, it's also like the capital A, and it's also written similar to souffle. But they say cut a deck. So it starts usually with 2 players or a dealer, which has that left, right, and dealer has day. Interesting. DAE is day. Level we're dealing with, you got like evening. You just only show your cards to who's on your team. And we also have the 11 in between Eve, which also can be seen as the 2 trees. We know that if we add that downward triangle there, we get the letter M. So we can see Adam and Eve right there, because that downward triangle is also the letter V. Damn. And they used to not use vowels. So without vowels, level would be like that. You also see a spade shovel. You can see some symbols too on our keyboards where we'll play with abracadabra. And then we can see knight, NGHT, right on top of that. The I is up here too if we want to include that one. So we're kind of dealing with like a veil of the abracadabra. And then so we have like abbreviations, also dealing with vibrations, acronyms, alternating current, rowing names, also dealing with the arc, um, chronos, ims, nims, names. So I want to get into that too because when you break away from those ripples in the center, just like that LO, it also makes me think of impact. Also deal with the LO, Elohim. It's also interesting that the one is kind of written like an arrow, or it's written like half an arrow. Like you can kind of see if that was an arrow too. Like arrow up, because when I did the how 0 equals 10, which is 1. Okay, to the next. Which we also have that arrow up as well. So we look at to the Aleph, this symbol right here. The N is the 14th letter, which upside down 14 you see HI as in high. So I'm going to get into that too, because if we add one rib to that, we have bi. So that gets into this. We look at Z as 26, which equals 8. 14 and 14, we're looking at where it should be folding, right? That should be 28, but it's minus 2. And we see how that Aleph has that broken 2. So when we look at the letter, we also see it in the symbol in Fila. There was different symbols for the same thing. So in the Fila symbol, also dealing with the red and the blue, when we do with game squares, if we put LIF together, we can fill that into like two opposing squares, like a black and white. So L is 12, which is 3, breaks down to 3. I is 9, and F is 6. So we also have that 3, 6, 9, 2. And just like not only do we have life, we got A lift. So A, only do we get like air, like breath of air to speak. Not only does that look like a mouth, it also looks like a wedge for lifting. If you look at like a car lift or a jack. So we're dealing with angles. Using symbols to lift up meaning, perception. And we also have the word Fila and Aleph too. When we look at the symbols too, you'll see the symbols there. When I get screen share, this is going to get deadly. Now I got a mic. So look at the word angle. We also see G nail, which could be looked at as ghost. G host. We see the arrow. So we're also dealing with energy and Jesus, who was nailed to the cross, which is the source.